I'm Nathan and welcome to Stories with a Twang. Today's episode is called That Black Cat from 13 Mississippi Ghosts and Jeffrey by Catherine Tucker Wyndham. To tell the truth, there was not a whole lot of grieving in Panola County, Mississippi when George Mathis died. Some folks said the preacher sat up all night trying to think of something good to say about him at the funeral service. He, the preacher, finally ended up just reading some scripture and praying for the family of the deceased, which was about the best anybody could do under the circumstances. At the graveyard, while the dirt was being shoveled over the coffin, one of George Mathis's neighbors said louder than he intended to, "That's sure one man who is going straight to hell as a martin to his gourd." Everybody standing around the graveyard heard him say it, and it sort of shocked them, him saying it right out in front of everybody and all, but nobody denied it. In fact, it sounded like several amens were said, subdued ones of course. That remark would not have upset old George Mathis one bit. He had been threatened with hellfire since his streak of meanness started showing, which was about the time he was half grown. But he would laugh a mean laugh and say he did not believe in such. He did not believe in anything except work, and there was never a man or woman he could work hard enough or long enough or good enough to please him. He would set tasks for his field hands that no plain human beings could get done, and then he would rave and rant and carry on when the hands did not do what he had told them to do. He would deal out right harsh punishment too, folks said. It was said that Mathis had flailed a good many men with a scantling when they displeased him, and a good many men bore permanent marks of Mathis's displeasure. He would put folks right off his land too, turn them out of the shabby tenement homes that dotted his plantation any time he took a notion. At least that was the reputation he had. It did not bother him a bit, folks said, if his tenants had nowhere to move or if the weather was miserable, or if there was no way to carry the little shirt tail full of things they owned. When George Mathis said go, he meant go, right then. Mathis, if folks remember right, mistreated his own family. They were scared of his wild tantrums and they tried to stay out of his way. So far as anybody can recollect, George Mathis never said a kind or pleasant word to anybody. He was a fractious man. Well, they say that one cold winter day, Mathis had a run-in with one of his tenants named Bowman. Bowman grew up in Louisiana, but he had lived in Panola County so long most folks forgot he had ever lived anywhere else. Bowman farmed on the Mathis land longer than anyone else ever had, but one day he got his back hurt while he was clearing new ground. He was pretty stove up from the accident, and when George Mathis saw that Bowman would likely be no account for a long time, he told him to get his family and his things off the place. Bowman did not think Mr. Mathis was doing him right, and he made bold to tell him so. He told Mr. Mathis that he was an old man and that his back hurt so bad he just could put one foot in front of the other, and that his wife was sick and that they did not even have a shed or a stable they could move into, and that he did not have a crying penny to his name. None of that made any difference to George Mathis. "Get off my land right now," he shouted at Bowman. He picked up a limb in the yard and started toward Bowman with it, but Bowman dodged and jumped through the door. Seems like he forgot about his ailing back for a minute, and slammed it shut and bolted it. Mathis stomped around the porch, beating on the door and the shutters and the wall with his stick and hollering at Bowman. He talked right rough. Bowman answered him slow and plain from inside the house. "I'll leave, but you'll wish you hadn't run me off. I'll put a spell on you and on this place so nobody will ever forget this day." That kind of talk really made Mathis mad. He fumed and bellowed and even threatened to burn the house down with Bowman inside, but finally he left. Bowman had learned some voodoo when he lived down in Louisiana, and maybe he did and maybe he did not put a spell on George Mathis and on the place. Strange things began to happen though, bad things. First off, George Mathis took sick and died. Nobody ever knew exactly what ailed him, it just seemed like he choked to death. Somebody said a conjure ball was found under George Mathis's front steps. Somebody else told about finding a little mud doll by the path back of the Mathis house. The doll was real plain, sort of a stick doll made out of red clay. Even though it was crude, the doll looked sort of like Mathis. It had a frown, a turned-down mouth, and real mean eyes. There was a cotton string tied real tight around the doll's neck. Well, when the church bell tolled the news that George Mathis had died, neighbors began to gather, the way they always do. The men nailed together some heavy pine boards they found out in the barn and made a coffin for Mathis. They dug the grave too, and they washed him and put his Sunday clothes on him. The washing and the dressing they did before they made the coffin or dug the grave. That always came first. It was early evening, dusky dark, when they finished everything. They put George Mathis's body in the coffin and they toted the coffin into the parlor. Somebody had brought sawhorses and the men set the coffin on them. The sawhorses should have had a black cover over them, the sort to hide what they were, but nobody covered those sawhorses that held George Mathis's coffin. They just didn't. It was like the neighbors would do what they absolutely had to do, but nothing else. One of the things they felt obliged to do was sit up with the corpse. There was a feeling that the Bible said neighbors should sit up with the dead even though nobody could name the chapter or verse where it came from. So the neighbors, a good many of them, sat up. They sat in the parlor, solemn and uncomfortable, the way folks are around the dead. All of a sudden, an awful racket commenced. It sounded like every dog in the county had set up a steady howl. They howled and they howled and they howled. Dogs came from every direction to join in the loud, tuneless chorus. Every man in the house tried to shut the dogs up and chase them away, but they could not do it. The howling kept up until, like they had got a signal of some kind, the dogs got as quiet as rotten stumps. Then they slowly circled the house, running around and around without making a sound. Somehow the silence was worse than the howling had been. After several laps around the house, the whole pack of dogs chased off across the fields. The men went back inside. They did not talk about the way the dogs had acted. They did not know what to say. Some of them yawned. It was a good bit past bedtime. "It'll be a long night," one of the men said. "A long night." He stood up and stretched and scratched the back of his neck. Just then, a black cat came into the room and began circling around and around the coffin, squalling and carrying on. "Scat," a woman said. "Get out of here. You're making enough fuss to wake the dead." Then she was embarrassed by what she had said and she left the room. The cat did not leave though. He just kept on walking around the coffin and taking his time and yelling louder on every round. "Out!" Two of the men started toward the cat and one of them kicked him. He did not really kick the cat though. The cat disappeared before the man's foot even touched him. That man's foot just swung right through the air. Folks looked at each other. Then they looked all around the room. The doors and windows were all shut, but the cat was gone. The watchers did not have long to wonder about this turn of events because in a few minutes the cat was back, patrolling around George Mathis's coffin again. He stopped every now and then to arch his back and rub against the sawhorses. Then he would sharpen his claws on the bare wood. He never stopped howling. The cat raised such a ruckus that the watchers could not hear each other shouting, "Scat!" and "Get out!" and "Hush your fuss!" A woman picked up a broom and started swinging it at the cat. The cat disappeared, vanished into nothingness. The watchers were just settled down again when the cat came back. He took up his noisy route around the corpse just like he would never left. It kept up like that all night. Every time the black cat was chased away, he would come back to yowl around the coffin again. The watchers were mighty glad when daylight came. After the funeral service, a day or so afterwards, George Mathis's son was walking across the yard toward the fields with Uncle Jake, a former worker who had come back to pay respects to the family. "Sid," Uncle Jake said, "don't you hear Mr. George calling you? Seems like I've been hearing your pa call you ever since I got here." Sid was glad, more relieved than glad, really, when Uncle Jake spoke like that. Ever since Sid had come back from the graveyard, he had heard his father calling him. At first, it had just been a whisper, but it got louder and louder all the time. Sid thought he might be going crazy. Nobody else heard George Mathis's voice, just Sid, until Uncle Jake heard it. But even the comfort of knowing that Uncle Jake heard the voice too did not blot it out. The familiar voice kept calling Sid louder and louder until he could not stand it anymore. Sid turned the place over to his cousin, Ben Hintz, and left. But even after Sid left, unsettling things kept happening at the Mathis place. Late every afternoon, along about first dark, all the dogs would bristle up and snarl like they saw something fearsome coming at them. Then the whole pack of them would circle around the house and head out across the fields. They would yelp and bay like they were trailing something. Whatever it was, only the dogs could see it. They would come back hours later, plumb wore out and acting like some of them were in a trance. Then the next day, the dogs would carry on the same way again. Every afternoon, they went tearing off after something nobody could see. There were other unnatural goings-on. Beginning the night after George Mathis died, folks in the house heard loud knockings and scratchings at the doors, like somebody or something was having a frantic fit to get in. But when they opened the door, there was never anybody or anything there. Then there were the dreadful nights when every member of the household was woken up by the rumbling sounds of empty barrels rolling down the wide halls and crashing into the walls. It was a terrifying noise, but nobody ever found where it came from. Though dozens of people were roused from sound sleep by the thunder of rolling barrels, no one could find a barrel or even a keg that could have made the blam-blam noise in the hall. A few times when the men were hunting for the phantom barrels, they met a strange black cat sauntering down the hall. They said the cat stared at them with evil eyes. Not all the unnerving happenings took place at night. Often during the broad open daylight after the women folks had made up the beds all neat and nice, they would go back into the bedrooms and find the covers all tumbled and tangled. The beds looked like somebody had thrashed around during a terrible nightmare, or maybe that there had been a knockdown drag-out fight. The feather pillows, plumped up and smooth a few minutes before, had deep dents in them, the kind a troubled head would make. It was not long before Ben Hintz and his family moved off the place. Nobody blamed them. Other tenants came and went, not any of them staying long. They could not stand the yapping dogs or the strange scratchings or the blamming barrels or the tousled beds. A monstrous big black cat bothered them too, so they left. The house stood empty a long time. Now just a pile of rotting timbers and a broken chimney marked the place. Occasionally, folks tell about seeing a black cat stalk out of the crumbling chimney. They say the cat has a self-satisfied smirk in that he strolls around the ruined house with a proud air like he owns the property. Alright everyone, that's it for this week's story. I hope you all really enjoyed it. If you would like to learn more about this week's author, you can head on over to ktwyndham.weebly.com. If you have any stories you would like me to read on the show, you can send them over to storieswithatwang@gmail.com. The show is on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Stories with a Twang Podcast. It would mean an awful lot if you could rate and review the show wherever you listen, and don't forget to share with your friends and family as well. It could really help the show grow. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and until next time, remember that a little twang goes a long way.